Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
I feel like there's this theme that's been developing during the course of this year, Steve, where we seem to be focusing on topics that are very related to the online world, the social media world, the fact that so much of our lives are interacting based on information or interactions that we're having online. But I actually think that's, before we get into our main topic here about the rating system, I think that that's actually an unsurprising reflection of the current state of the world that we're finding ourselves in, that so much of it is plugged into the online world now that it's like there are advantages. There are some wonderful ways that it's like a nice tool, but in so many other ways it's stripping out a lot of nuance out of just daily experience. I mean, we'll go into that in a bit more detail later, but I don't know, are you finding that? Like, it's just I feel like it's 2025 and this is where we're at. We're past the mid 2010s where, I don't know, all of this was new and fresh, but now it feels like it's embedded, and for the good and the bad.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, there's been a lot of good things that have come out, I guess, over the last 15 years through that connected nature that, I guess, initially the internet, and now really the social channels have brought us. But, like a tide that's coming in and ebbing at our feet now, or we could get flooded with maybe things that we don't really want, or all those knock-on effects. And I think we see that in people's attitudes. We see that in the way people perceive situations and might perceive the way they see actions or situations unfold. And I think what we're about to talk about today is just one aspect of it. But just because the group believes that something's the way it is, or that's how we perceive it online, doesn't necessarily mean that's the truth.
Well, I'll give that a 5-star rating right there. Alrighty, so let's talk about the old 5-star rating system and just some articles that I've come across and videos also that have popped up in my feed about it being broken, etc. And there's obviously, I think, with this sort of thing, it's like the intention is to try and simplify and give people information around a whole manner of things: restaurant reviews, shop reviews, flight reviews, hotel reviews, and keep going. The list is endless. Like you'll typically find, like, you could probably do a Google search on any of this stuff, and the couple of top searches will end up showing you a whole list of whatever you search for, along with a very convenient, rating out of 5 that's been user generated or whatever. And I guess the intention maybe initially there was to try and give you more information as a consumer when you're searching for this sort of stuff. But there are unintended maybe consequences to using such a system. I'll give you a classic case in point. I was in Perth earlier in the week, and I searched for this Thai restaurant that had a 4.9 rating on when I searched for it in Google. I am cheating here a bit because I do know of this restaurant in Melbourne, so I figured it would be good. But let's just say I was looking for it. I went. That's what it said, and it was here. But unfortunately, it was closed that first night that I was there. So I was like, all right, what to do? And I did something that, you wouldn't consider doing in the online world here. I just walked out of the hotel and I found a ramen place across the road. And you know what? Without checking it, without reading up on it, and it turned out to be fantastic. One of the best ramen places I've been to in a long time. And I just wonder, I got myself hooked up on going to this Thai restaurant just because, it's well rated and whatever, and it and all of that. But then, I just, without thinking, ended up having this amazing culinary experience without doing any research whatsoever. And I took a risk, going there without having done the research beforehand, which I find funny, because I guess my point that I'm getting to here is that isn't that part of the experience of experiencing things, that, that you have to take a risk that maybe it's not good. And for me, it felt a bit more, palatable and a better experience because it exceeded any expectation I might have had. And that's part of the experience too.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. And, ratings is something that the internet can present really easily. You know, everybody's given it this many stars, and of course, I stayed at the hotel and I've got a bad neck and they didn't send up the pillow that I specifically ordered. 0 stars, ruined my holiday. Meanwhile, someone else stays at the same place, gives it 5 stars because they've never stayed anywhere better. That versus say something like a restaurant. Restaurants, I think most people, maybe less so if you're younger, but if you're older, you taking a risk with a restaurant or somewhere to eat is a lifelong sort of experience that you have. If you remember before the internet, before ratings, does it look all right? Is there anyone else eating in there? That's all the rating you need. So, but if you're buying a $3,000 coffee machine or a TV or something like that, you probably want some sort of security in the reviews and ratings. But I think the reality is that everyone's starting to wake up to the fact that they're not necessarily accurate. And if you actually look through a few of the usually top rating reviews on Google, there's one original review that's been scraped 6 times, and that goes to the top, and that's the only information you can find. Not very helpful.
Well, leaving aside the review bombing for the time being, even if you just take into account the idea of human behavior when doing ratings, and you're likely, or what you're likely to find is that people are either going to rate it 5 out of 5 or they're going to rate it 0 or 1 out of 5, and there isn't like an in between. So there's not going to be 2s, 3s, and 4s really, because and it's got to do with like some of the psychology of it. So if you're like feeling very angry about whatever it is, like your pillows weren't turned over or whatever at the hotel, you're going to rate them 0 just to make a point. But say if it was okay, but it wasn't like spectacular, but it got the job done, you might still rate them 5 because you don't want to make them feel bad by giving them a slightly lower review or whatever. And then there's this whole other component of, well, what about what's the difference between 4.2 and 4.3? If it's 3.8, does that mean it's only average, or are we only looking at stuff that's over 4.5? And what happens if you have a 4.9 rating somewhere, and then it turns out for you personally it was probably more like a 1.2? Like you see, like you can see the issues develop very quickly in terms of using it as a way to secure yourself against the risk of a bad experience.
Oh, totally. And my favourite, of course, is I gave it 1 star because 0 wasn't available. So yeah, we see a lot of this. And the idea behind the rating system, I think, was probably, and we were talking about this before, when you had a trusted, I guess, a journalist effectively rating a restaurant or rating a product, and you have that accountability and an expectation that it's an unbiased review, and that they would use the same criteria that's kind of set out in the what some of these articles are showing, where you have a set criteria and you're judging against a set criteria, not a criteria which is kind of, this is how I woke up today, I went to this restaurant, I had this experience, which may or may not have varied by the hour or the day or the week. So yeah, it's very difficult these days, whether it's a movie, whether it's so any sort of content, right through to a product, right through to a service. It's very, very hard to really know. And I think at the end of the day, really, people, if they have a good experience, still go back because they trust their own experience far more than they do anything that they might see online.
I was going to just touch on the tomato meter there quickly for movies, because there's been an interesting phenomenon start where the critics rating can be at stark contrast to the user rating. The current season of The Last of Us has got like a stellar critic rating, but it's in the toilet with the audience, and and it's just and I can understand why, looking at the discourse around why that's actually occurred, because some of the creative choices that were taken with this current season. But it just goes to show that because a movie's rated 90%, that it automatically means it's good, further to that point. And I just kind of feel like, we would like go see a film because it had that actor or it had that director directing it, or even because it was a franchise at this point. Like, I'm also wondering whether the franchise IP thing is even relevant now if that rating isn't above 85%, when it comes out on review day.
Oh, exactly. And we also, they're a brand new phenomenon, thanks to the internet as well, where effectively you've got fans barracking for outcomes or barracking for the casting or not barracking for the casting. So someone gets overlooked that's a fan favourite and that movie's down the toilet. Doesn't matter how good it is. We didn't like the ending because it wasn't consistent with the book. It's quite incredible. Like what it shows is, to a certain extent, you can't deny that in most cases there's a democratization of opinion, but it doesn't necessarily relate to how somebody just looking for a review, is this content any good? It doesn't necessarily relate to their experience. So these things all play in, and they lead to a very distorted review world. And then the irony is that, nowadays they say, oh, well, we use AI to vet those reviews. But the reality is all AI does is normalize the strongest response. So it's not as if it actually vets. It just says, well, 60% didn't like this choice of cast member, so therefore it must be a bad movie.
The other thing I was also thinking is just this tendency to then push people into a groupthink scenario where, you're getting influenced by the review. So, you were looking forward, take your pick really, like we'll use the movie example. I'm looking forward to seeing this particular movie that's coming out next month, and then the reviews drop and it turns out it's only sitting at 72% rating, which is for my own use, I probably wouldn't spend money on going to see it if it was at 72%. But should I be but say I was really looking forward to it because the ingredients of what it was presenting, like in the past I would have gone straight to it. I probably still would go to it if it had factors about it that interested me. But if you're then like deciding, oh, okay, so it's 72%, oh, they're saying that maybe the first hour dragged out a bit too bit, some of the action was good, but this is how it is, and then like I go in and watch it and start to think the same thing, hypothetically. Of course I don't do this, I have my own brain about judging these things, but I can, concerns me about that sort of thing, that it leads people to then think that they think the same as the review, in effect.
Completely. In the olden days, everyone prior to ratings being widely available, everyone has had the experience of going to a movie that the critics said stinks or is fantastic and having completely the opposite experience. I found that with Inception, to be quite honest. But it is interesting that you're right, that you can then be influenced, very easily by the reviews you've read. Nothing to do with the story, just, this movie was really slow, this actor was just not up to it, or the reverse. And what I find most interesting about it, especially when you consider the way films are marketed, you almost wonder if the bad reviews or the good reviews are a success or failure of the social media campaign promoting the movie.
Absolutely, yeah, because it's all exceptionally tightly coordinated these days, and the word gets out instantly.
That's right. So when you see a bad response to say a blockbuster film, is that true democratization of everyone going, no, don't believe the hype, it's crap? Or was it just not what they expected? We'll never know unless we go and see the films ourselves.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. There's so much more that we could talk about with this, but don't believe every 5-star rating rating that you happen to come across, or 0-star rating for that matter.
2.5 is tops for me.
Absolutely. Alrighty, so that's it for this week's episode. We'll catch you next time.